Hello there. My name is Gail Robinson. I'm president of the Ash Creek Conservation Association, and I'm here to share with you the news that our Sandspit at St. Mary's, shown in the photo to the left. Let me see if I can use this pointer. Yes, again. Okay, this is the area right here. That's our Sandspit at St. Mary's that is eroding at a rapid pace. In fact, it's eroding so fast that it's projected to disappear in 15 years. May disappear even sooner if there is a large storm event. When the Sandspit is gone, Great Marsh Island will soon follow. And this is Great Marsh Island back here. And then all of our tidal wetlands, all of these fringing wetlands, all around the lower part of Ash Creek, those will soon follow after we lose the Sandspit and Great Marsh Island. For those of you who live near the shores of Ash Creek, or even as far inland as just south of Fairfield Avenue, from Gilman Street on down to the Ash Creek Bridge, the news gets more personal for you. The Sandspit and Great Marsh Island provide barriers against wave action, and the tidal wetlands act as sponges, so there'll likely be erosion and loss of land for homeowners along the shoreline, as well as potential structural issues for foundations as the water encroaches on buildings. And we've actually seen this starting to happen to some of the homes in Lower Ash Creek. Even if you've not seen one glimmer of water from your windows, you still may be required to have flood insurance, as storm surges will have much more power once there is no longer a Sandspit, Great Marsh Island, or tidal wetlands. So the water is going to come inland further and farther. If you aren't shocked and angry by the end of this presentation, then I will have failed to convey to you the gravity of this situation. You know by now, after 17 years, that our organization is not alarmist. Trust scientific methods. We've always hired ecological experts to guide our decision making. And we recently commissioned a study to determine how fast the Sandspit is eroding and to project that rate of erosion into the future. We knew the rate was high, but we didn't know that the Sandspit was in danger of disappearing completely. So this is a shock to us as well. We need to take action, and we need your help to draw attention to the plight of our Sandspit, to the authorities who can change the course of this erosion. The first thing we need to do is to all get on the same page as to what areas we're talking about in Ash Creek when we talk about erosion. Then we'll take a look at the changes to the Sandspit over time and the projected future changes that the scientific analysis revealed. I'm also going to pull out the FEMA and storm surge maps to take a look at the residential areas in Black Rock that could be affected by this erosion. By this point, you're going to be asking, how did we get to this point? And what exactly has our organization been doing for the past 17 years to prevent this? Yes, we've failed miserably to stop the erosion, but it's not for lack of trying. So we will take you through what's been tried, and why it hasn't worked. Finally, we're going to talk about next steps. This is kind of like global warming. It's not too late to act, but we're on the precipice. If we don't do something now, it will be too late very soon. Or we're all on the same page with understanding what areas we're focusing on. What you see on the screen is an aerial view of the lower part of Ash Creek. In the foreground, you see the Sandspit, okay, or Barrier Beach. It's covered in snow. You also see the tip of the park at St. Mary's, which we've been restoring over here on the right. And Great Marsh Island is right behind. The South Benson Marina in Fairfield is over here to the left. And the channel where the dredging occurs is right here in the foreground. Now, try to imagine the Sandspit, or try to imagine, this view without the Sandspit or Great Marsh Island. And what I've done is Photoshop this view so that you can get a sense of this. You can see how open the lower part of Ash Creek will be to wave action and storm surges. Waves will come right up the tidal estuary and only be stopped by residential land at the north end, along Beachview Avenue, Livingston, Newton, and Gilman Street. If the storm surge is strong enough, it will push right over the land, past Portland and Clarkson, all the way up to Fairfield Avenue. The homes over here on Bay Edge Court in Fairfield and other areas of Fairfield could be affected as well. It's not just a Black Rock problem. You only have to go back 10 years ago to see an aerial view of the Sandspit with no erosion. 10 years later, our Sandspit has eroded significantly. It's shorter due to a combination of soil removal by dredging and erosion from the dredging. It's also narrower due to the erosion. Alarmed by these changes, we commissioned a scientific analysis of the Sandspit erosion after the 2019 dredging by Fairfield. The analysis was conducted by Brian Quinn of One Nature and Dr. Stephen Danzer, who have both done a number of projects for us, including the 86-page Ash Creek Ecological Master Plan in 2012. They discovered a loss of 60 linear feet over a 10-year period from 2006 to 2016. Based on the current rate of erosion, they predict the Sandspit to disappear by 2036, or perhaps sooner if there was a major storm event. They also noticed erosion on Great Marsh Island, which we will discuss in a minute. The Sandspit had been stable from the 17th century until the 1950s, when Fairfield built the jetty and the marina. In the 1950s, the Sandspit began to lose sand. In part, this is due to the jetty preventing the sand from migrating down the shoreline to the Sandspit, but it's primarily due to dredging by Fairfield to keep the channel open for boat traffic. To make matters worse, the sand taken away from the channel and cut away from the Sandspit is deposited onto Jennings Beach instead of being put back on the Sandspit. Bridgeport hasn't fought for the sand. We have, but the DEP listens to municipalities more than to small grassroots organizations like us. As you know, the 2019 dredging caused tremendous erosion on the Sandspit, which we'll talk about in just a bit. The contour map, which you see above, from the analysis, shows a 60-foot linear retreat over a 10-year period from 2006 to 2016. This is the linear retreat right here. That's the difference. It's a complicated chart, so I know it's not easy to read, but this is what the scientists used to determine this. They had 3 different levels of contours. They had contours from 2006, 2011, 2016 at various heights. So it's It's an impossible chart to read, okay? But that's the important part right through here, is that there was a 60-foot retreat at the 4-foot contour level over a 10-year period. They were very familiar with Sandspit. They've been coming here for more than 10 years and examining the Sandspit and doing studies for us. They were shocked. Scientists were shocked by the results of their analysis. We all knew there was erosion, but we didn't realize how much erosion until we measured it. It's also important to notice that the average height of the Sandspit is lower. The high point is still 10 feet. Here you see it, 10 feet here. But instead of the 10 feet coming all the way out here, the 10 feet has retreated. It's now much closer to the mainland. There is less high land, so washover by storms with lower wave heights is now possible. And there is less land and vegetation through here to protect the Sandspit from waves. Our scientists also noted changes to Great Marsh Island. Great Marsh Island, as we said before, is this area right over here. They found that the island had lost about 25,000 square feet of intertidal marshland over a 29-year period, from 1991 to 2020. They hypothesized that this may be due to increased wave action caused by the reduction in the size of the barrier spit. Our scientists confirmed that once the Sandspit is lost, Great Marsh Island will be the next part of the tidal estuary to disappear. The tidal estuary has been around a long time. Here's a photo from 1909. And it's so long ago that up in this area where we have a lot of homes, Sailor's Lane, it was just pasture land. There were actually just a couple of homes you can see here. This is the Blagis home, which is a historic home in our neighborhood. So Bond 4th Street existed at that time. But I think what's important to note is that this tidal estuary has weathered many storms. It's been robust enough to bounce back from everything that's been thrown at it until now. 50 years later, Great Marsh Island looks still relatively unchanged, despite pollutants from industrial waste discharges from the upper part of the creek. You know, we had a lot of industry, brass works and whatnot, up on the upper part past the Ash Creek Bridge. This aerial photo was taken before the jetty and the marina were built. See, there's no jetty here to stop the sand from coming onto the Sandspit, so the Sandspit is quite robust. And there's no marina back here. The extensive tidal wetlands on the Fairfield side of this photo were filled in to create homes at Fairfield Beach, or excavated to create the marina. Every time wetlands are reduced, there is less of it to absorb the impact of storms and prevent flooding to area homes. 25 years later, we see a 300-boat marina, a jetty preventing sand from migrating onto the Sandspit, and regular maintenance dredging of the channel. With sand from the dredging going on to Jennings Beach. It wasn't until the 1980s that laws were enacted at the federal and state level to stop the loss of our tidal wetlands. This is a view of the area from a different direction, 43 years later. There's not much change to the tidal wetlands from the 1976 photo, thanks to the tidal wetland laws of the 1980s. Now, let's take a look at this photo without the Sandspit and Great Marsh Island. I photoshopped Jeffrey Stedman's fantastic aerial photo and to show you what this area would look like if we were to lose the Sandspit and Great Marsh Island. As you can see, waves would be able to come right up, right through the lower part of Ash Creek and would only be stopped by the upper part of Ash Creek. The loss of tidal wetlands is a problem for those living around the shoreline of Ash Creek because tidal marshes act as sponges, absorbing floodwaters. The barrier spit attenuates waves. The waves break against the sand spit instead of the residential shoreline. Great Marsh Island offers a second line of defense against waves. That will be gone as well. When the barrier spit and Great Marsh Island are gone, the lower part of Ash Creek will be open to direct wave action and storms, causing residential flooding and the destruction of the remaining tidal wetlands. When we talk about residential flooding, what areas could be affected? There's no perfect way to figure this out, but our scientists said taking a look at the FEMA flood map and the storm surge map could help us identify homes that could be affected. The difference between the two maps is that the FEMA flood maps are based on 100-year storm predictions of areas that could flood, whereas the flood surge maps are based upon the strength of a storm and what areas could flood during the storm. Of course, you know, it's imperfect because it very much depends upon, you know, what tide, whether it's high tide or low tide when the storm hits, and, you know, what angle the waves are coming in from. We saw very different effects from Irene and Sandy in terms of flooding in Ash Creek, so we know that's true. But if we take, for example, a Category 1 hurricane, we can see that here, that's in blue, and that would, you know, wash over most of Great Marsh Island. It's showing that it wouldn't wash over a good part of the middle part, but that's not true anymore because that was based on a 10-foot elevation that we don't have anymore. It would totally wash over Great Marsh Island, and it would go inland pretty far. You'd come down Gilman Street and come up Clarkson and, you know, Livingston, and, you know, we can see it go pretty far inland in some of these areas. And that's just Category 1. You get to Category 2, now you're already up to Fairfield Avenue. Okay, so you got, you know, that's just a Category 2 hurricane. Category 3, you get flooding much further inland. And in fact, at that point with Category 3, if you're on Grover's Hill, you won't get water, but you're going to be isolated. And Category 4 is just absolutely catastrophic. So, you know, in Category 4, actually almost every home on Lake Avenue gets flooded. In the past, the Sandspit was high enough to withstand a Category 2 hurricane, and now it's at a height where a Category 1 or even a tropical storm could wash over it. If the storm is strong enough, it could take out the Sandspit completely in one storm. To get a better sense of what could happen, I overlaid the storm surge map on top of the Bridgeport GIS map for the lower part of Ash Creek to get a better sense of which homes are in storm surge areas. And I actually counted up each home by hand, counted 194 homes directly in the path of a storm surge coming up Ash Creek. These are the homes that would most directly be affected by the loss of the Sandspit and Great Marsh Island. And why these areas? It's because most of these areas are filled in marshland, so they're close to sea level. You can figure out whether your home was built on filled in marshland by looking at a map from the 1880s. Most of the homes in the Fairfield Beach area are built on reclaimed marshland, as you can see. This is all marshland, and now over here, it's homes. We have fewer areas in Black Rock built on reclaimed marshland, but we do have 57 units in Pleasant Bay alone. You can see this is marshland here, and it's now, been built on. And we've got this area that goes right up to Fairfield Avenue through here that's been filled in and built up with homes. All these residential areas were once marshland. So what led to this erosion problem? Well, there are, four basic things. First, filling in the wetlands and building on reclaimed land. Second, Fairfield building their marina, jetty, and then dredging every 5 to 7 years since the 1950s. And putting sand recently, since the 60s, on Jennings Beach. Natural events such as Irene and Sandy, and rising sea levels from global warming. Marshland does grow over time. It grows on top of the decaying matter from old plants, and therefore it rises in height year after year. But it can't keep up with the pace of sea level rise, which we know has risen a foot already, over this since the beginning of the century. So what can we control? Well, the only thing we can change out of these four elements is Fairfield's dredging. And we'll go into that in just a bit, but that's something that requires a permit, requires a license every time they dredge, and that's something that we can have a say over. Dredging occurs approximately every 5 to 7 years, and the town has to get a license each time it dredges. The town only has to take out a permit from the DEP once every 10 years. The DEP permit allows Fairfield to take sand from the dredging activities on the spit, and it also allows it to put that sand on Jennings Beach. This dredging permit was granted in 2007 and 2014. We had requested in 2013 that the DEP permit require the sand to be put on the Sandspit, but the DEP sent us a letter and said no. The 2019 dredging caused tremendous erosion, and we're going to go into that in the next slide. There was an alarming amount of erosion from Fairfield's dredging activities in 2019, as most of you know. This is what caused us to contact the town of Fairfield and the DEP. It was the DEP who requested more information and resulted in us commissioning the scientific analysis that we discussed previously. I'd like to say that once we submitted that scientific analysis to the DEP and to the town of Fairfield, that they took action, but that hasn't been the case so far. We're hoping that through this talk and the publicity around this, that we will start to see some action on these issues. To understand how we got to this sorry state, we need to go back to when the trouble began in the 1950s, and then take a look at all the efforts at habitat restoration and subsequent destruction that have occurred over the past 70 years. The first sign of trouble for Ash Creek was when Fairfield became serious about dredging for their marina back in the 1950s. In order to avoid having to get permission from Bridgeport every time they dredged, Fairfield worked out a deal with Bridgeport to divide the Sandspit at St. Mary's between Bridgeport and Fairfield. Until that point, the boundary line had run down the center of Ash Creek and around the Sandspit. The Sandspit was in Bridgeport. But here you can see, here's the new boundary line where that had run around it. Okay, and again over here, here's the Sandspit. And as you can see, they've come right like this, made an angle because they want to dredge through here. They want to be able to have the right to get rid of all of this sand. Many people in Bridgeport still don't know that Fairfield owns part of the Sandspit. In fact, we brought this to the attention of the city as they were preparing one of their park master plans. The first dredging occurred in 1957. At that time, the channel was excavated to 50 feet wide and 4 feet deep, which was not terrible. In 1961, Fairfield expanded the South Benson Marina to provide moorings for 390 boats, so expanded from 300 to 390. In 1967, Ash Creek was dredged to deepen the channel to make it more accessible to larger boats. The channel was excavated to 70 feet wide and 10 feet deep at low tide. The sand being dredged was used as fill for a 4-acre tract behind Jennings Beach. And ever since then, the sand from dredging has been put on Jennings Beach, not on the Sandspit. And if you notice right here, look at how Jennings Beach looked prior to the dredging fill being put there. And look how nicely filled in it is now. Yes. Okay. Our organization was formed in 2003, so we weren't here for the earlier dredgings. But when the DEP issued a permit for dredging to the town of Fairfield in 2007, we got involved. The city of Bridgeport allowed Fairfield to dredge the channel using the Sandspit as a staging area. This meant heavy equipment crossing over the length of the Sandspit, flattening the dunes, and destroying vegetation. And you can see this is the way it looked prior to that staging and dredging. And then this is how it looked afterwards. It's devoid of vegetation and it's very flat. The permit required the area to be restored to its previous condition. Prior to the dredging, the Sandspit had a lot of vegetation and dunes, as you saw in the photo on the left. And the city wasn't taking any action on the restoration. So we brokered a deal between Fairfield and Bridgeport. In May 2008, we brought in Dr. Orson, who had been a habitat restoration consultant to save the sound, so we felt municipalities would find him credible. And he came in and did an analysis of the damage to make recommendations on the restoration. I know you can't read this, but this is Dr. Orson's report. He reviewed aerial photos from 2005 of the area and concluded that the habitat had been changed from a dune community to a mixed flat sandy community. He explained that the purpose of the beach grass is to create sand dunes. If the Sandspit is too low in height or too small in size, it ceases to work as a barrier to the sound and dramatically changes the Ash Creek ecosystem. Dr. Orson estimated that it would take about 5 years for the dune formations to reestablish themselves. It would require bringing in sand and planting beach grass to hold the sand, and that would allow the sand to accumulate. The beach grass would accumulate more sand as overwash occurs, And in this way, that's how sand dunes get built up, and the vegetation climbs on top of the sand dunes and grows higher and holds the sand dunes because their roots go in very deep. The town of Fairfield accepted the recommendations of Dr. Orson and agreed to bring in enough fine beach sand to raise up the Sandspit 1 foot and rework the area to create a low dune. They also supplied about 32,000 beach grass plugs, and we arranged for volunteers to plant the grass plugs. We estimate that the restoration cost the town of Fairfield about $100,000. We also met with the Parks Department in Bridgeport, who had no objections to this as long as Fairfield was paying for the restoration. BlackRock Energy was very helpful in our meeting with the Bridgeport authorities. Fairfield dredged again on June 15, 2010, but the dredging did not damage the sand spit, even though they did dredge from the spit. They were careful to bring the equipment along the sandy shoreline and not disturb the plantings, and it wasn't a major dredging. We knew it would take 5 years for the plantings to take hold, so given that this was the second year after the plantings, we're keeping our fingers crossed for no major storms for the next 3 years. Of course, that didn't happen. We had Irene in 2011 and Sandy in 2012. But prior to that, there was another destructive Sandspit event. I don't know how many of you remember this event, but it was very vivid in the minds of all of the volunteers who had planted those 32,000 plugs of beach grass, and for the rest of us who, are environmentalists. On June 24th, 2011, the city of Bridgeport came to the Sandspit with a brigade of heavy machinery and removed approximately 50% of the new plantings. On the side of the Sandspit where the waves break against it during the storms. There was no notification to the community of their plans. The city positioned this as a beach cleanup and part of an effort to provide more access to the waterfront for citizens. They claimed no permits were needed, which is not true. They said this is parkland and they can do whatever they want as long as they don't go into the water, which is also not true. And they did go into the water. The state has jurisdiction over land below the mean high tide water mark. The mayor's office put in writing, they put it in an email to us that no more work would be done. And it was also reported by the Connecticut Post on Monday, June 27th, that the city had said no more work would be done. We had contacted an environmental attorney for an emergency injunction against the city, but we dropped the action when the city agreed in writing to stop the destruction. In retrospect, of course, we wish we hadn't dropped that injunction, because unfortunately the city did not keep their word. They came back with a machine around 10 a.m., 4 days after their initial work, to comb the beach, and they got mired in the mud on the tidal estuary side, as you can see right here. We called the DEP, who sent their environmental analyst, Kevin Savoy, to the site. Kevin arrived while the machine was still in the muck. One of its tires was less than a foot from a pair of mating horseshoe crabs. He wrote up several violations and ordered the city to stop work on the site, other than to remove the fill that had been placed in an intertidal zone below the mean high tide water mark. Some of the violations included that the oil was leaking from the machinery into the water, working below the mean high tide water level without a permit, and placing fill below the mean high tide water level. The DEP required the city to present their plan of remediation to us for review and approval. Here is a view of the Sandspit before and after the city cleanup. You can see the amount of vegetation that was there prior to and how it was scraped off. So a few weeks after the city scraped off the vegetation on the Sandspit, Irene struck. In the photo on the left, you can see the power of the wave action during a storm. Just imagine not having the barrier spit or Great Marsh Island to break up these powerful waves. I think you can understand that the waves could go very far up Ash Creek and far inland if there were no obstacles. The photo on the right, you can see that Irene created a channel that almost split the barrier spit off from the mainland. If the channel became permanent, the Sandspit would disappear quickly. It only takes one bad storm for the Sandspit to vanish completely and forever. The photo to the left shows the waves breaching the highest point of the Sandspit during the storm. This was not even a Category 1 storm. It was a tropical storm. The photo to the right shows the damage to the Sandspit after the storm. We hired Steve Danzer to come out to assess the damage to the Sandspit after Irene. Dr. Danzer mapped out the areas of disturbance. He had measured the areas of disturbance on June 26th, right after the damage by the city. Then he came back after Irene and measured the disturbed areas again. Area 1, right here, was where the city had scraped off the plantings. The regrading by the city removed the sand dunes and left the Sandspit vulnerable to washover by Irene. Area 2 was damaged by heavy equipment from the city. Area 3 identified a fill pile left by the city in an intertidal zone. And while the city had removed the pile prior to Irene, the area had been disturbed and had much more damage from the storm as a result. What vegetation does is it anchors the sand. The roots of the beach grass grow very deep, and the grass captures the blowing sand, then climbs above the sand. Over time, the area gains height due to this process of capturing the sand and climbing above it. A Sandspit with sand dunes and vegetation that gains height year after year provides protection for the fragile tidal estuary behind it. Anything that levels sand dunes or destroys vegetation makes our tidal estuary much more vulnerable to storms. As I mentioned previously, the DEP required the city to develop a plan for habitat restoration and involve us in that process. The city's way of involving us shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was disappointing nonetheless. They called us to come to the mayor's office at 4:30 the Friday before the work was to begin. The Blackhawk NRC kindly joined us at the meeting. We were handed a 48-page document and asked to approve the planting plan on the spot. We said we needed time to review it, and the city said, nope, the work was scheduled to begin on Monday, and we had to approve the plan in the meeting. We did not give our approval, but the work went ahead as scheduled, and the city did plant 300 containers of American beach grass, 50 beach plum shrubs, 50 sand cherry shrubs, and 50 staghorn sumac shrubs, all under order from the DEP. We hired Dr. Danzer and Brian Quinn to review the plan for the plantings and their implementation, as well as to provide recommendations to the city for further habitat improvements to the Sandspit. We shared copies of the report with both the DEP and the city, and we provided a conceptual drawing for landscape design, which you see in front of you, which was intended to be a starting point for dialogue. It was not meant to be a final plan by any means, and it has no detail on plants. It just was created as a discussion document for the park's master plan. We had hoped to be included in the planning process for the future of the Sandspit, which is under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. Now, I know you're starting to see a pattern emerge, and you aren't expecting anything good to come of this effort with the city, and you are right. Instead of working with us to preserve and protect this fragile landform, the city planners decided to turn the Sandspit into a mini Coney Island with boardwalks and sheltered pavilions for picnicking. Having seen what a tropical storm did to the Sandspit with Irene, I think we can all agree that any structures on the Sandspit would be washed away and create debris that would cause problems to the marshlands and even residences. No structures should be built on sand dunes. Sand dunes need to grow in height and shift in shape. You'll note that the vegetation is missing in the area where it's needed most. A sandy beach is created where vegetation is most needed to protect against waves breaking on the Sandspit. So of course, this is all very frustrating and just makes you want to throw up your hands and say, forget about it. But we did not. We persevered. The following year, we commissioned a comprehensive scientific analysis and plan of conservation for the Ash Creek tidal estuary. Our steadfastness is now finally being rewarded with support from the city and grant money from foundations, as well as the larger environmental organizations like Save the Sound. Then along came Sandy. We all remember Sandy. This was another storm event, but it came too soon after the new plantings by the city. Sandy washed over the Sandspit, removed most of the vegetation. The storm also created a channel that almost made the Sandspit into an island. And what I have here is 3 photos, before and after photos, so you can see the difference. Again, here's another photo. You can see all the vegetation washed away. You can see the plantings here. And then this was that intertidal zone fill area. And again, you can see plantings are just gone. It just washed right over that area. There was another dredging in 2013. Fairfield used a barge this time around. There was no staging from the Sandspit at all, but this was a major dredging. 22,000 cubic yards of sand were removed, and they were placed on, where else? Jennings Beach. With all the destruction on the Sandspit from Irene, Sandy, city cleanups, and the dredging, we knew the Sandspit needed a major habitat restoration. Money was flowing into Fairfield and Bridgeport from the federal government after Sandy, so we thought this is the time. We wanted to make it easy for the town of Fairfield and the city of Bridgeport to move ahead with habitat restoration for the Sandspit, so we created a shovel-ready project with specifications for plantings, the amount of sand, grading, and layout. This would allow the city to go after federal funds from the government for shoreline restoration money that was due to Sandy. The cost would be about $300,000. The money was out there being given to both Fairfield and Bridgeport, so we felt we had a chance. We met separately with Mayor Finch and his staff, then First Selectman Tetro and his staff. We recommended convening a joint meeting with both municipalities for both the long-term planning of the tidal estuary and this specific project, and both municipalities agreed to meet. So now we're finally getting somewhere. Now, I know you're skeptical that anything will come of it, but of course, we have to try. This is a look at the cost breakdown for the shovel-ready project. Although the estimated cost, you'll note, was about $300,000, okay? Half of the cost, as you'll see up here, was for beach sand. Gee, now where could we get beach sand from? Oh, right. That dredging project that occurs every 5 to 7 years. So we just need to get Fairfield and Bridgeport to cooperate with us. Go after the funds from Sandy and for Fairfield to let us use the sand for the Sandspit. How hard can this be? On November 10th, 2014, we did meet with Mayor Finch and First Selectman Tetro, plus their staff, at the Black Rock Branch Library. There were about 20 people in the meeting because they all had their staff with them. Our long-term goal for the meeting was to take first steps for joint management of the Ash Creek tidal estuary by the 2 municipalities. And our short-term goal was to get the municipalities to agree to the Sandspit restoration project and go after the money from Sandy. We also, of course, asked for the sand to be put back on the Sandspit instead of on Jennings Beach during dredging projects. Bridgeport was enthusiastic, but Fairfield said they didn't want to make any commitments in the meeting. They would get back to us. There was a spirit of cooperation and goodwill between the two communities and our organization. We were encouraged. Bridgeport said they thought they could get money from Rebuild by Design for the project as they had money coming in from a second round of funding from Sandy. Unfortunately, the political winds changed. Mayor Finch, who represented Bridgeport at the meeting, was not elected mayor, and we weren't able to get the 2 municipalities together again. Now we come to the latest dredging in November 2019. Fairfield used a barge but caused tremendous damage to the Sandspit. This was a $700,000 dredging project, so it was a major one. The town had options for what to do with the sand. Once again, guess what happened? Yes, they decided to put it on Jennings Beach. They were still within the 10-year general permit period, so there was not an opportunity for us to object about where the sand was to be put. We did notify Fairfield, Bridgeport, and the DEP that dangerous conditions were created by the Sandspit, and you can see this sharp drop-off here. Anybody walking along the edge could just fall right into the channel, and we know how dangerous the channel waters are. We were working with the Fairfield Conservation Department, but then there was a turnover of staff, and we began working with Fairfield's Engineering Department. We've also been in frequent contact with Sue Bailey at the DEP, who issues the permits for the dredging. One thing we've noticed is that the dredging projects are getting bigger and bigger, moving more and more sand. Why, you might ask? Fairfield says the larger scale dredging is being required because boats are getting bigger and have bigger hulls. So what we have is a conflict between the needs of boaters, who are people with money and power, and the environmentalists who want to protect Fairfield's natural resources. It's clear which side is winning at the present. We need stronger allies on our side to protect our Sandspit. We can't count on Fairfield as they have their own internal conflict going on between the boaters and the environmentalists. We need Bridgeport on our side, and we need the DEP on our side. We will continue to try to find allies in Fairfield, such as the Fairfield Shellfish Commission and the Fairfield Conservation Commission. These are the actions that we think should be taken. Dredging should be scaled back. We don't need deeper and wider dredging for bigger boats. We need a tidal estuary. Sand should be put back on the Sandspit when Fairfield dredges instead of on Jennings Beach. Fairfield and Bridgeport should use federal funds for the habitat restoration of the Sandspit and use the habitat restoration plan, which we developed in 2014. Of course, that needs to be updated. And then the 10-year dredging period is just too long. The permit should be for 5 years. It doesn't need to be for 10 years. We need to reevaluate the dredging based upon the health of the tidal estuary. We've contacted a lot of people and presented a version of this PowerPoint show to them. Of course, the key players right now being Bill Hurley and the Fairfield Department of Engineering in Fairfield, and Sue Bailey of the DEP, who approves the dredging permit. We've also gotten in touch with David Brandt at Aspetuck Land Trust, as his organization owns half of Great Marsh Island, and we'll be meeting with him on July 21st. We are also trying to arrange a meeting with First Select Woman Brenda Kupchik, and we are trying to get on the Fairfield Conservation Commission agenda and the Fairfield Shellfish Commission agenda. And in Bridgeport, we're in contact with Steve Layton of the Bridgeport Parks Department. We've worked really closely with him over the years. We are trying to get on Bridgeport Parks Commission agenda, but we have sent a version of this presentation to every member of the Parks Commission. We've also sent it to Steve Staffstrom, our state representative, Scott Burns on the City Council, and he's on the NRZ, Matt McCarthy on the City Council, Mayor Ganem, and then his staff, including John Urquiddy, who's the City of Bridgeport Engineering Department, Joe Bresco, and Dan Roach. And of course, we're hoping that Steve Staffstrom will have some influence as our state representative with the DEP at the state level. We need your help to put pressure on the people who can influence the decision makers. This is from the presentation that we gave, the live presentation at the Fairweather Yacht Club on July 13th. But instead of a handout, I will be listing the email addresses of people you can contact in the newsletter that I send out. Please contact the people that we give you the email addresses for and ask them to use their influence to get the DEP, the town of Fairfield, and the City of Bridgeport to take action. We need Steve Staffstrom to put pressure at the state level and Scott Burns and Matt McCarthy at the city level. The DEP and Bridgeport need to put pressure on the town of Fairfield. We want to make it simple and quick for you, so just an email stating your concerns based on what you learned in this presentation. Just ask for Fairfield to put the sand back on the Sandspit at St. Mary's during their dredging operations, and for both municipalities to use federal funds for habitat restoration of the Sandspit. Our tidal estuary is too precious to lose. Thank you.